Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage, from NVIDIA, David Weinstein.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for sticking around towards the end of VRLA. We appreciate your being here. Please join me in welcoming our panelists on stage. One, two, three. Perfect. Seats for everyone and waters. All right, have a seat, team.
Do you need a water?
So we've put together, oh, thanks so much. We've put together an awesome panel for you guys. This is going to be super fun. I'm trying not to get distracted by the robot that's going to keep going back and forth. Just to set the stage for this panel, I want to start off by playing a quick video clip that I think everyone will be familiar with, but sets the stage for the next 50 minutes.
There's nowhere left to go. Nowhere. Except the Oasis. A whole virtual universe. People come to the Oasis for all the things they can do. But they stay because of all the things they can be.
Can you feel this?
Yeah. It's the only place that feels like I mean anything.
Awesome. Okay, so obviously I can't take credit for any of that, but a lot of the people on stage here with me can. So yeah, let's applaud them for that. It was a great movie. Did everybody see the movie? Yeah, that's what I thought. Good. Okay, so over the next 45 minutes or so, I want to do two things. So first, I want to talk a little bit about how virtual reality is being used in virtual production. So as many of you read online in various news sources, RPO was a great, Ready Player One, RPO, was a great example of using VR to do what's called virtual cinematography. So I want to start off by talking a little bit about that, and then we're going to segue and talk a little bit about sort of the VR that was portrayed in the movie and what the roadmap looks like to get from where we are with today's technology to there. So that's kind of what we're going to go through. Before we jump into any of that, though, I want to introduce our panelists. So I guess we can, you guys can't see the slide. Let's go, I'll try and go to the slide. Perfect. Okay, so we may have sat ourselves down in the right order. Looks like we did. Nice job, team. Okay, so for each of our panelists, I'd appreciate if you could introduce yourself. Name, where you work, what you do, and maybe just, a sentence about kind of your favorite moment from the RPO film. So we'll start with you, Lisa.
Okay, hi. My name is Lisa Bell Cabrera, and I work at NVIDIA. I do business development and work with VR partnerships for NVIDIA. I've been there just a little over a year. Prior to that, I worked at CCP Games and worked on Eve Valkyrie, Gunjack, and Spark from the business development and sales side. There's so many favorite parts of Ready Player One. I mean, first off, it was being able to get everything accomplished for GTC this year, which is our big GPU technology conference that NVIDIA has every year that kicks off in San Jose, and then we take it on the road for the rest of the year. We were able to get the approvals and get everything for a Ready Player One experience in our holodeck platform. So we actually had a escape the room experience where you were in H's basement, and it was super fun. Everyone enjoyed it. That was probably one of the biggest things. And then I think from the movie itself, I think Ty Sheridan did a really good job of portraying Parzival. You just wanted to root for him, but the most memorable part was when he goes into, this decrepit junkyard And that's where his virtual reality room exists, and he puts on that headset. That's where VR needs to go, is where you just are taken then into this other reality that's so much better than your own. So that's my
Perfect.
favorite part.
Thanks, Lisa.
Hi,
Ryan?
sorry. My name is Ryan McGid. I am the virtual art department supervisor for Digital Domain. And so we were in charge of actually building the Oasis. So the Oasis that you see in the movie was actually constructed before the movie, and that's how they shot it. And I think my favorite part of the movie was the New York race. It was the first thing I got to work on, and it was just really nice to see kind of where it started to where it ended up. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, great shot, great
Yeah,
sequence
it
there,
was- it
super
was
fun.
fun,
Ian?
Yeah. Hi, my name is Ian Phillips with HTC Vive, and I work, I've been with the company for a little over 2 years, and I help to bring our products to the market. So help get them from, engineering R&D phase to a product that can be used by consumers. I have a long fascination with the idea of a co-located space and telepresence. So the Distracted Globe is really my favorite scene from the movie, where you can bring folks from all over the world into the same space and share a space, whether it be virtual or real or mixed with the two.
Great, awesome. Girish?
Hi guys, I'm Girish Balakrishnan. I work at MPC currently as virtual production supervisor, currently working on The Lion King, and before that I was working with Ryan and John and a whole awesome team of people at Digital Domain in LA and in London, trying to build the Oasis for the virtual production of that show. It's been a really awesome movie to be a part of, with so many awesome pop culture references. My favorite bit of that is when you first meet IROC in the movie. Sorrento comes out and he takes a look in the background. There's a huge War of the World tripod in there, and then when he picks out the Orb of Osavox, he takes it out of the Gremlins kind of case.
Yeah.
That was one of the cool sequences. I think it's such a funny bit.
That's great. John?
Hi, I'm John Brennan. I work at Magnopus. I'm the virtual production lead. I essentially make tools for filmmakers to shoot so that their traditional filmmaking skills, like the language that they know to shoot and make movies, that they can work in these spaces where in the past they were just concepts and ideas that people would agree to or that they would see arrive later. And now with the arrival of VR as our tool set, we can kind of go and inhabit those constructs. I've worked in psychology labs. I've had an interesting path to that. My favorite part of Ready Player One is actually an anecdote about in the Shining scene. There was a moment there where Girish and I kind of dared to take a light bulb and break it and make a little strobe effect when H is dodging the dagger for the zombie woman that attacks him. And that was the only time we really dared to make a change to a scene. And I just remember, like, Spielberg saw that and he was like, "That's great. That's in my movie," you know. And that's like, it's kind of autobiographical, but that was like my favorite part of that process. It was kind of a good little moment.
Nice, successful. I'm glad it worked out well and didn't go the
Yeah,
other way.
we didn't do that very often.
So that's a perfect segue, because you started to talk a little bit about virtual production and how VR is starting to play a role in there. And this is I think a new area. You guys spend a lot of time thinking about this every day, but for the audience, it would be great if you guys could tell a little bit of that history. Over the last year, 18 months, or 24 months, whatever it is, how has VR started to be a tool, and hopefully a mainstay tool for directors and DPs to use as they're blocking out and shooting these amazing sequences?
I mean, I think early on when we were working on The Jungle Book, we had started towards the end and middle of that process. We started getting access to these early headsets as they were coming out. And it was a really kind of revelatory time to start looking at these virtual worlds in a different landscape. And then we started, as the technology got better and better with every single iteration, and Ready Player One being the perfect movie to use virtual reality for, it became just a natural evolution to be able to use those things. What we find is that virtual production, I always have thought about it as it's a area to build context to understand your film better. Not only just to shoot it and film it, but it's really about understanding your space, your world, and being able to make decisions in a real-time environment within that space. And a lot of the tools that we try to build is, in essence, trying to aid in facilitating that workflow.
So maybe just pop up one level in case people aren't familiar with it. You know, the idea of using a VR headset or of, what does that allow? Can you go through a little bit the mechanics of that and contrast it with how traditionally film has been shot?
There's an interesting bit there. So Girish and I worked on Jungle Book before that, and I think you can even jump a little further back in time to Avatar, like being made this sort of way. Like that's how we know of this buzzword, virtual production. But in my particular position, I remember often finding myself as like a crux, like a person sitting at a box, doing things on the computer, and you have a director or a DP behind you over your shoulder, in a way disempowered, asking you to accomplish things through this flat monitor that is essentially their creative space. And that's how it works, you know? And I think that this process, why this is starting to get exciting and what we'll be talking about here, is that it allows people like that stop that little bottleneck, which was me in some of these cases, to like step aside and let them actually inhabit and build things and move things themselves, not ask people to do things and not get frustrated while they're trying to achieve their vision. That's how I would characterize it.
Yeah,
the engagement's really high. You know, you enter these worlds and people stop talking about them as concept art or things on a monitor. They talk about places that they've been. When they talk about going to the distracted globe, they talk about it as a place that, remember that bar over here, we should stage the action over here. They should come out of this entryway. They should go up to this ledge. They talk about these sequences as places, like you would on a live action film scout. And they're able to think about them and plan their shots in that sort of way. And that's really the empowering factor of using virtual reality in these sort of landscapes.
And they don't even really have to kind of like guess what it's going to look like, because it's there. Everything is there. So there's, they're essentially playing the video game of the movie before the movie ever comes out. So when he would walk through any of the environments, and he actually had the actors do the same thing, because when they're doing all of their acting, they're on a big white stage, and they, it's like, oh, well, pretend you're walking through a cave, or pretend you're walking through this. And, if you can show it to them right before they do it, or even, Stephen was able to see it while he was shooting. He could see what was being shot in the background. It's just a more immersive way to be able to kind of finalize those shots.
There's this great slide image that I like to use when I talk about virtual production, and the picture is of a director holding a camera, looking at a scene, but the camera has a lens cap on it, right? Whenever I put up this slide, people are like, "Hey, that's a mock-up. That's not." I'm like, no, that camera is a prop. Right, that camera is not full optics of the camera and the director is looking at it. The director is seeing essentially a rendered video game, but this is used for tracking purposes, right? It has all of the handles and knobs that a director or photographer is used to, but it's essentially a prop. And it was with that explanation that people suddenly were like, oh, okay, I get it. So, it's a video game now, as you say.
And he was able to scout his shots well before he ever thought about shooting anything. So, he could go into any of the environments and kind of walk around. With these guys, he could move around props. I think you guys said that he spent a lot of time in VR before he ever shot anything.
Almost 50 minutes to an hour of just constant back and forth of in a headset, out of headset. Everyone else getting in their own respective headsets and communicating and making the key thing is you're getting the creatives to make decisions as opposed to relegating that power to people who are technical behind a box. You're giving the power back to the filmmaker to be able to make the movie that they want to make in the way that they want to make it.
Yeah.
They must love that, right?
Yeah. As an anecdote, when he was shooting a railing, and he used his Vive controller. He stood up and he kind of placed it where the railing would be while he was in VR. He's like, okay, so that's where that'll be. I want it here. You know what I mean? I want to be holding it down here with my hand, because he had a shot in mind that would use that. Right. So it's that story kind of encompasses it. He's able to see that before they build that set. Yeah.
Is it a natural translation for directors who haven't had this before? Are they like, oh, thank God it's finally here? Or is it like, man, this is sort of a complicated new tool and it takes a while to get your brain around it?
I think it's half the battle is convincing them to even get into VR, getting even to use CG in general, right? That you face that battle every time you get into any sort of visual effects production. But I think the value that the tools and the technology enables allows them to make those decisions in the best way, in the most effective way possible. And effectiveness is the key here. You don't want to be making those decisions on a 2D with the concept art when you can just actually go into the world and make the decisions right there within your space. There's a great bit where he's on the volume with the actors, and they've blocked out the scene as you would with a traditional storyboard. He puts on a headset, looks around in H's basement, where you see the big iron giant, and then realizes that,
Oops.
he realizes, you know what? This is a great shot here. We should feature the giant, and it would be great if they were able to start on his hand and go all the way around between the legs. And he only was able to think of that shot because he's visualizing this world in a fidelity and in a manner that allows him to see it like you would in a live action set, right?
Yeah,
that's the power.
He doesn't touch it via a storyboard. He's in there touching it in a sense.
From more of a consumer standpoint, one of the things that was really powerful was when we took the assets of H's basement, we put them into the holodeck. It was, in the holodeck, you're taking 50 million polygons. You're not degrading the scene. And so the scene, as you're going through H's basement and you're picking up things, then 2 days later, after we started showing the holodeck at GTC, we had a pre-screening. So everyone that was involved got to go see the movie privately. And when you saw H's basement on the 2D screen, it just sent chills down my spine because it was like I was in there.
Right. Yep.
So yeah, it makes it kind of interesting.
Yeah, one of the things we see is a common application, and this goes almost double for filmmaking because it's such a creative process to interact with the thing that you're trying to create, right? And VR really has a way of removing a layer that has so long been present in the way that we create, right? As an artist, you can paint in 3D. That just changes the way that you think about creating those types of images, and that rolls onto other industries as well, visualizing the brain and interacting with products and different types of construction. It's just that reduction of complexity that now your brain doesn't have to make that extra translation. We can use some of those extra cycles to be more creative.
Yeah. So I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about VR technology because there was amazing scenes in the movie, and as people who play in VR and are sort of helping to build that technology, I watch these sequences and the haptics are incredible, and the visuals are all, or the headsets are, super lightweight, powered by I don't know what.
Magic.
Yeah, magic apparently. And that's where we all want to head. So maybe let's take stock just for a couple minutes of where we're at today, and then we're going to contrast that, of course, with where we're heading. So, the visuals are getting good, right? They're getting higher resolution. Vive Pro is awesome. What's kind of? Do you want to talk a little bit about state of the art for tracking and for HMD resolution?
Yeah, exactly. So a lot of the focus is really making a complete experience that solves for enough of the I hesitate to call them tricks, but they kind of are the things that your brain needs to jump to in order to realize that it's interacting with this space. And right, you mentioned tracking. Tracking has to be accurate enough at a high enough refresh rate that your brain still thinks, "Yep, I'm here." Otherwise, you start to feel disconnected from what you're looking at, and that's where people start to get a little bit woozy about their simulation, right? And focus on making sure that the tracking is accurate not only to the way that they move, but the way they tilt, the way they look, the way they jitter. Watching from another person's eyes, as you can often see, it's like the head moves a lot. Yeah. It's moving around all the time. It's constantly jumping and bouncing and just twisting itself around. So making sure that tracking is very one-to-one, and that when a person moves, that the image that they're seeing moves as well is really important for us. So the technology is really close right now to the point where we see fewer and fewer people have any kind of impact from that sickness, right? People can interact with it, and we are learning more each day with all the different applications we have on how to prevent people from feeling disconnected from the image that they're looking at, and preventing the brain from realizing that it's being tricked.
Yeah, and I guess it's worth pointing out that tracking, some of it's visual, some of it's the head, but we also want to have legs and arms and hands and all of those things. So, what are some of the challenges with being able to track more and more components so that we really do feel immersed?
Right. So a big limitation, obviously, is on the ability to process all of that information. Right. There's a whole lot of motion that goes into a person moving, right, and an avatar, and that feeling of your presence, and it's definitely oversimplified to think that it's just based on your joints. But some of the things that we can do now that are even starting to really create that sense of presence for people is making assumptions on how the body moves, and then finding points that we can tie to in order to make that more and more accurate. So realizing that the shoulders, the elbows, and the hips are really key to the upper body motion and how a person's body language reacts. And then the feet being not just, the knees, but the ankle joint as well. So it's out here on your foot instead of up on your ankle. Makes a big difference to how the body moves and how it can assume those different things. And then the points in between here don't move as much. So we can assume that this shin is going to be in the same place that it was a second ago. And then that creates enough of those points where you look at yourself and you do a motion and you say, that's probably what my body did.
Yep.
Yeah,
Lisa,
I think it is the motion to photon issue, right? And one of the things that NVIDIA is doing is with our last architecture, Pascal architecture, and our GPUs, we're creating APIs, and we're creating the opportunities to improve upon that through our graphics processing, through shading, through LMS, lens match shading. We are also not just working on that graphics piece and the latency piece, but we're also working on things like audio, because you'd be surprised how much audio impacts the feeling of being present. So with our ray tracing technology, we have an audio API. And then it's the physics piece, too, that's kind of missing in VR, and that's a really tough one, because you want, when you are in VR, you want the world to obey like it does in the real world. So if I touch this chair, I want to feel like I don't want my hand to go through. These are all really hard problems right now that I think, to get back to your original question, I think we're just at the beginning stage. We're at the maybe, I don't know, Atari Pong, NVIDIA or Nintendo, early stages, something like that, but it'll come.
I think it's worth pointing out that there's a little bit of an arms race, right? Every time that we release a GPU that is capable of driving great experiences on their current generation of head-mounted display, they release a new head-mounted display that takes it to 11. It's okay, more pixels, more shaders, great. And so 5 Pro is great, but I don't think you guys are done, right? There's more resolution coming. So on the one hand, there's that challenge. On the other hand, one of the reasons that I played that segment at the beginning is there's a lot going on in the Oasis, right? It's not just like 3 characters standing in a room. There's live action, there's all sorts of physics, and there's this whole other part, virtual reality, but there's also the virtual world part, which isn't really about rendering and graphics. It's about how do you simulate all of that. And
and it's about human interaction. It's about people.
Yeah.
I mean, that was the one thing with the distracted globe piece, when he can feel her touch and sit behind, and you're in this big experience with hundreds, thousands, however many people. That's a part that is somewhat missing in VR today as well. You want to be able to have that kind of interaction. There's some games out there. I'll say, one of my favorite games is the Wave VR. that you can kind of have that interaction now in a way, but they're still not really, what Directive Games did is they built the Oasis of today, not the Oasis of Ready Player One in the future, which will eventually happen. Right?
Yep. Excellent. Well, I mean, it's exactly to that point, is that we do a lot of design that focuses around avoiding the barriers that we have right now. So like you said, you want to be able to touch this chair and feel that chair, where a lot of the way that we create that content right now is so that you don't feel like you have to touch that chair, so that it doesn't break the immersion.
Right.
Like how do we keep people from doing those things that would cause them to go, oh yeah, I'm in a simulation. So
Right, you don't want to break the magic trick, right?
Exactly.
You break the illusion and people fall out of VR.
Yeah, so the further we go with that technology, the more things that we can start learning about content. And it's very much a climb in order to do this, because as we find a new piece of technology that we can work with, a different type of haptic or a different type of restrictive motion on a glove and things like that, we have to now design differently, assuming what are the limitations of this technology compared to the technology we had before, which was a buzz when you hit something, and now it's actually a slight bit of restriction. But if you move through that restriction, does it push too much restriction on your finger? Like, how do you manage that type of physics between the person who's interacting with it and the experience that you really want someone to have?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the haptics, and I love that sequence in the movie, right, where she's like, "Can you feel this?" And he can, and haptics today. Well, maybe you guys can talk a little bit about where haptics is at today, because of all of the component pieces that have to go into VR, it feels like A, it's a really, really hard problem, and B, it kind of has the longest ways to go.
Mm-hmm.
Sure. So some of the unique versions of haptics right now that we really see are, as I mentioned, so restricted motion, right? Using different types of haptics to create a simulation of a feeling, right? One thing that was really great about the movie is they could say there's a suit and it has things, and those things make you feel heat and cold and pressure and force, and you're like, well, that sounds dangerous. Like, if you can do all this stuff to a person, and in a way it really is, because if you start actually applying real pressure to a person's finger, doesn't take very much pressure to keep you from being able to move your finger there. So having a band that, say, attaches to the tip of your finger and then keeps you from moving it, like, you could probably hurt yourself pretty easily if you have that calibrated wrong, or just a miscalibration of it for a person. So that's while that is a really neat piece of technology, it's going to take us a little while in order to figure out how to do just enough of it that you keep someone from hurting themselves. A great application, I believe they're here too, is the Tesla suit as well, which uses a different type of haptics for your skin. Another really unique use of it, but it's tense units, right, in different locations around your body that attach to your skin in order to create the simulation of muscle movement, simulation of force. And it doesn't actually push on you, but it makes you think that you've been pushed on, right? Enough of that your brain makes the rest of the jump for you, and you can react in a way that you wouldn't. One of my favorite experiments that there's a great viral video that's floating around about it right now is putting a person's arm on the table and a wall so they can't see it, and then a fake arm right in front of them. Yeah. And you tickle this one at the same time as you tickle the other one, that they start to feel that body placement where they now assume that that's their arm, and then they whip out a hammer and smash it in front of you. And everyone freaks out because it is startling, because your brain has now assumed that's where my hand is, that's what I am doing.
Yeah.
And it's enough of that impression that you now believe that you're part of this reality.
Yep. The last piece of tech that I want to talk about, the last piece of 2018 tech I want to talk about before we jump to sort of the future is the wireless piece, right? So there weren't, people just put on the HMDs and it just worked. So maybe you could talk a little bit about where we're at with wireless, here today.
Sure. Yeah, no, happy to talk about wireless as well. Some of the technologies that really we have to focus on are being able to allow for all of those aspects of physics, those polygons, those methods that we're using to actually render those hugely complicated scenes, like you were mentioning earlier, Lisa. All of that needs to be able to be a motion to photon, which is the delay between your movement and the thing that you see, at such a low level that we're rendering it and we're sending it back and forth across a radio wave that doesn't have any kind of gap or loss or skip, because otherwise you run into the same problem that everyone has had. And in order to do that that effectively, we really need new types of wireless technology so that there's no delay, because we've been, using Wi-Fi, it's not going to be sufficient, and using 4G is not going to be sufficient. So we're really looking at technologies like WiGig to provide a short, access to that information being passed between the PC and the headset. So one of our pieces of hardware we've been working on, and we've spoken about a little bit this year, is the partnership with Intel and DisplayLink, where we've created the wireless adapter that will adapt to a Vive Pro or a Vive CE that can pass that information back and forth between the computer reliably, so that you don't notice a difference in not having the cable. But then we look slightly further forward, and we're really pushing towards 5G being the next version of that wireless connectivity. And as HTC, with the wireless connectivity is definitely something we focused on in the past, and we really see that as the next important step in order to start passing this large amounts of information, not just locally like you can use WiGig for, but over long distances and through walls. And in the same way that you use a tower for 4G right now, you could now transfer that same amount of information over bandwidth that has a much bigger pipeline.
Yeah. As you were talking about wireless, it occurred to me, we didn't talk very much about, when Spielberg is on set and he's using these first generation or second generation VR technologies. Did some of these limitations about it's a tethered experience and the resolution, were those pain points, or was it just so magical that it could be done at all that people were willing to accept kind of all of the equipment and shortcomings maybe that came with it?
I think there's no novelty to VR when you're working it on a practical production, right? You will do what you need to do to get the shot. And for VR, if it means you're carrying a 40-foot cable and 10 people are like daisy chaining it around, that's what you're going to do if the tool is effective, that the value shows, and in this case, VR was, right? We're able to set up a Vive anywhere in a conference room, on a stage, wherever we need it to go. It's flexible. You can put it down, bring it up. You want to run a scout, you want to run a shoot, whatever you need it to do. It's portable enough for you to be able to move wherever you need to, and the tool is effective enough that it was called out upon to be able to utilize it. So it's easy to kind of fall back on if it doesn't look good or the lighting isn't that great, and those are kind of eventualities that we expect. The technology is going to get better in time, the resolution will get better, the graphics will get better, the engines will get better. All of these things are incremental improvements, but even at its current point, there's value to be seen, and there's things to be learned through the process. There's enough that can be gathered just by looking around the world to be able to say, you know what, we should move these things out of the way, we should stage things over here. And you can make some really important and otherwise expensive choices in using that medium versus any other way possible. And there's scenes that can only be done because you saw it in that sort of way. Ready Player One is a super imaginative movie, a movie that required dynamism in the set design, to the animation, to what was possible. It's a living video game. And when we're designing it with Ryan and his team, they are building every single one of these assets that you're starting to see at a very early stage and populating these worlds for us to really build this sandbox for them to be able to play in. And that's really where you start seeing the marriage of the technology and the art coincide with VR.
And I don't think it was too restrictive to him really at all. I mean, I think it's in an HTC promo where you see him, he's wearing the headset and he's laying on the ground. and it's almost just part of him then. It's not, oh, this is uncomfortable on my face and I'm at a weird angle. He's just like, oh, I'm in this place, I'm going to see a really cool shot because I'm on the ground and didn't think twice about what he was wearing.
Nice. So there's some amount of recursion here. So, when you look at a movie like Ready Player One and the Oasis is just chock full of cool places you can go, right? And a lot of these are in the book, and a bunch of them are in the movie. And as you're watching it, as I'm watching it, I'm thinking, gosh, in the future, who's going to create all of this content, right? You guys had a whole team who created it for the movie, but it's not like it goes out in the public domain after that. So any thoughts about where where all of the content for the Oasis is going to come
I always
from?
joke it's just that make game button because everyone's just like, well, just press that button and it'll happen. It's just going to be teams. It's going to be teams of people creating that content. I mean, there's things that can happen with photogrammetry, but I mean, once that kind of that dials in. But even with photogrammetry, that's real life stuff. It's not the Oasis, and so it's just going to be teams of game artists putting that all together.
Crowdsource it.
Yeah. It's actually one of the guys in the crowd right now, Anthony. So there he is, way back there. So he was another artist where, I mean, really, we only had 8 people doing all of the characters and all the environments for all of the Oasis.
Wow.
So that's all of the environments, it's all of the characters, all of the props that they had to interact with. And without a lot of time to make too much of it, I think.
To clarify, though, the real time.
Yeah.
The
real-time
real-time
assets.
Oasis.
Yeah.
Which is the one that we build with, not the one that you see finally rendered.
Yeah.
On screen.
The one that was used to shoot.
Yeah.
Not the beautiful ILM one that I'm sure took the extra 2 years to make.
Yeah.
So we worked for it a year. What was it, a year and a half?
Year and a half on it, yeah.
And then it took another year.
Yeah, I mean, it's really about the iteration time. I think there's this flow that's happening where a lot of the film people who've come from a traditional, even VFX, last decade of film, starting to dabble in real-time technologies, and they're starting to understand the limitations but the benefits of using real-time technologies even in their current form. And when you start getting into shading, lighting, asset creation, there's a different language that comes from the game industry that you're starting to see brought into film. Every major VFX house out there is starting to leverage real-time in some form or fashion, whether it's a game engine or within their visual effects workflow, and you're starting to see the talent that's really required is starting to come in from this other industry that's tangential, that's been also very, very much doing game cinematics and other sort of really high fidelity work starting to come into this play, and I think it's a really exciting time for this crossover to happen at the tone.
A really great kind of parallel that I would like to draw in is in a lot of ways this is oversimplifying it, but think early days of the internet when you had to contract someone and pay a whole lot of money in order to have a web page made. Right, and we're looking at in the RPO environment, there's all of this content has already been created and it's all over the place, and everybody can create their own, and there's even references to where Age is creating his own stuff custom for other people, right? Because he's one of those creators, right? Yep. He's a community person. That's not his job. He just does that. And there's definitely that parallel with how the internet worked, where originally you have to get a website from someone else, and now you can just build them on Wix. There's even Square, where you can have them pre-built for you, and
templates and tools that help you do it. You don't have to be an expert anymore.
Right, and there's a lot of great examples of that starting to kind of surface in VR right now, such as a Poly API from Google, where they allow you to import tilt brush items or items from the marketplace into certain VR apps that use this API, so you can start creating those things from the community. Or Steam Home, which is part of Steam VR in Valve's software, where people are just importing the photogrammetry that they've created or the areas that they've tracked as their home spaces and then sharing that with their friends.
So we have a few minutes left. I definitely want to leave time for questions. So I wanted to go down the line. We'll go the other direction this time, just to not put you on the hot seat going first twice.
Thank you.
So, sure. So two questions that I'd like each of you to answer. First one is, how long do you think it'll take to get to that RPO future? And I'll preface that by saying I saw an interview with Spielberg where he said 3 years, and that seems like a stretch goal. So I'd love to hear what you think about that. So that's first question. And then second question, assuming we get there in X number of years, what are you most excited about for kind of how you're going to use VR in that future? We'll start with you, John.
Right. I hate to malinger on that question. I don't want to argue with Spielberg, but so I'm not going to actually. The thing that's interesting to me is that, talking about the technology in terms of an arms race and the incremental improvements and all the things that Dan talked about. I guess what strikes me is that that is kind of like a constant march, and it's kind of amazing. and you can count on it, and we all come to count on it, and we expect the latest and greatest to keep arriving, and that iteration improves. So to me, that's not like the problem. I think in a way that we're kind of already there in a way. I think what's actually missing is like the language or the lexicon of like what to build and how to build it and how to present this sort of space or this sort of technology to people so that it's interesting. And I see a bunch of people taking these tools and like trying to figure it out right now. Like that's what right now is to me.
Yep.
And then the only technical thing I'll add on top of that is that the Oasis seems to me very Second Life mixed with an online platform a la Unreal or anything else, where if you could make your game and click publish, that it went to a portal in a platform that we all shared. That's what it would represent. So again, I think hardware people are keeping up their end of the bargain. You know what I mean? Like I think we could have that. This kind of online platform is the thing to work on. You know.
I think that a lot of it is inevitably iterative, and I don't think, for what you see in the film, whether it's wireless headsets or cloud computing, building worlds, or web VR, or massive multiplayer, all of these are concepts that we all currently, to this day, have. As you're mentioning, they're worlds that we can get into VR chat or any of these sort of applications that you start engaging in these sort of ways. The Oasis is going to take effort from every person, whether it's software, hardware, the community, everyone involved. And I think the more you can galvanize people to understand the technology and find value inside of it, the more they will feel compelled to use the technology to build their own worlds. And that'll help build the eventual Oasis. I think for me personally, I think what's the most exciting about this space is, I think I said earlier that virtual production is all about context, and I think when we look at what virtual reality will bring to our own society as humanity and what augmented reality will do to understand our world, we'll have a better understanding of not only the psychology of ourselves in these digital spaces, these experiences as we call them today, but we also will have a closer relationship with our world and understand how to augment it in a way that'll benefit us and not take it completely away. And I think those are the balances and challenges that we'll start to face over the next decade after this kind of early bubble of technology is the groundwork to be built.
That's a very good point, especially because we want to look at building the world of RPO on the technology side, not the dystopian side.
Yeah,
so
right.
there's definitely a balance there where we want to focus on those things in the right way. But I will just a little bit disagree with Spielberg, just because I can get away with it, I'm sure, in that there are certain things in there that may be a little bit outside of that realm. But I also don't think they'll take as long as really that timeline assumes. That we're a lot further along than a 2045 or a 2048 timeline would look at, and there are a number of things that are going to get us to a point where you really feel like that is the world that we've created, even though it may not look exactly the same. There won't be a full body suit, but there might be other things that we solve that may not even look like that still create that feeling of force or that feeling of interaction, or really just the immersion that you could get with that kind of world.
I think it kind of comes down to the adoption of the platform and the adoption of the whole idea of VR.
Yeah.
Because once more people start getting into it and they start feeling like this is something that I really want to do, then the more content comes in, the processing power gets faster. So I mean, I think a lot of that stuff is already there, and it's just a matter of getting people into that experience and figuring out that it's worth it. Yeah. And so once you cross that threshold, because I mean, in Ready Player One, that was their escape. Like they felt like they had to do it. And there's so many things that people can do now that they don't have to go into VR. But if there's something that is drawing people in and having more people to it, you have people buying more headsets. The cost of headsets go down, and it's not cost prohibitive to anybody. You could have some kid in high school buy a headset, which maybe may not be the case right now. So I think once you have more universal acceptance of that, you'll get closer to that whole kind of setup.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's about 5-ish, 10 years away. I think that there's a number of things that I think. First off, I'd like to see VR for good. I'd like to see things like what the Gates Foundation is doing, where you can go to Aleppo and actually see what's going on there, not just what you're seeing on the news or you're not seeing on the news. And then from a content side, I think there's games for me. I don't play shooters. I don't want that kind of experience. If I want to escape, it would be like a game like Journey. If anybody has played that game on PS or PS4, I'd love to be that person walking through the desert. I'd like to have that first-person experience and be able to feel that type of thing. That would be, to me, my ultimate cool factor of being able to be in Journey.
Nice. Okay, we've got a few minutes left, so I wanted to open it up to questions from the audience. I think there's some microphones that can be run out, so raise your hand if you've got a question. Yes, someone is standing next to a microphone that isn't working.
So will you guys at any point release the Oasis software you guys have created?
Well, I mean, in fairness, the software that we used was the Unity game engine, and there's layers of code and things like that on top of it, but it's not much farther, especially from if you consider that we were working on the movie almost 2 years ago, you know, with all the recent releases with Timeline and Cinemachine.
Do you mean the content, like being able to actually walk around in the Oasis, or are you talking about what is actually used to? Yeah, so probably not. Actually, on the floor, you can actually see, what was the name of the company? Air One. They actually have the throne room from the Oasis at the end of the movie. So there have been little pieces like even the H's garage, I think, was taken from the original thing that we had built. But as far as releasing it as a standalone thing, I don't think so. Sorry.
Yeah, question over there.
I'm working here.
Sorry about that. So I was just wondering, would you guys know why the creatives decided to take such a departure from the book itself, besides just like runtime and obviously like the different copyrights? It just, from a lot of people's perspective, it was like the movie was based on the book, but it wasn't like a direct translation. So any insight on that?
I can't speak too much on that. I think the screenwriter was involved the entire time through the production, and it's a very challenging movie, a book to even translate into a movie form.
And you mean Zach? You mean
Zach Penn and Ernie Klein?
Yeah. So he was involved. The author was involved.
And he was on set on several occasions. He scouted environments with us, and so it's kind of good to have the blessing of the author. It's also, we want to honor the vision that the director wanted to bring onto screen, and I think that's also much.
I think there's always a bit of a translation that has to be done when you go cross mediums, right? Like even the example earlier where we're talking about working on 2D and then now working on 3D, like it's a different environment, and in order to convey the things that were conveyed to the fans of the books, you have to convey those in a different way now that you're working with a different medium entirely. Yeah. I mean, speaking as someone who probably doesn't know anything about making movies.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think any of us can speak to like the creative aspect of adaptation there. I guess I can give you like one little anecdote that behind the scenes it was very interesting watching a whole team, or not a whole team, it was actually a couple of individuals that worked really hard frantically attempting to get the rights to things. Like that was their entire job on like a project like this, on a book like this. So that's one challenge. Maybe that led to certain concessions right there. I don't know. But like you'll notice that there's certain things that were in the book that weren't in the movie, and someone's job was to chase that down full time and get those rejections and chase after the things that did get in. It was fascinating to watch it happen.
I think we have time for one last question. Yes. Do you need? Yeah, sure.
Some different layers, or I should say the stages. So you have the lower res version of all the environments that you are doing some level of virtual scouting in and doing production in. Can you talk a little bit more about the differences in like resing it down and making those more workable and what they were compared to what you see on the screen, I guess?
Well, so it really starts as a video game, and a lot of the stuff that we did was we would work with the production designer and you know some of the concept artists, and we would actually build it before it went to ILM. So it was all pretty much how you would envision video games. It was all built in Maya. We ran everything with physically based shaders, so it looked like a real thing, and so it really gave him an understanding of what the final was going to look like. I mean, obviously, so once we were done with everything, we would actually send that off to, you know, once it went through these guys and they did all their shots, those shots would go directly to ILM, and they had all of our content. And so, if anything, it was used as a blueprint for what they actually wanted to build. But I mean, obviously, it does not look the exact same as the final movie. But there were, in some instances, it looks very close. So, like, you know, when I wasn't able to see all the stuff at ILM, but you know, watching the movie, I could definitely point out things that were not that much of a departure off of what the game environment was. Everything was done into Unity, and it looked pretty good.
And I think when we were building it, we're building it in different contexts. I think we always also work with higher res assets with the post-production vendor to make sure we're working in a way that they can also be able to translate the assets into their world. But when we bring it onto our stage, we have a VR version which you may not have shadows, you may not have the high fidelity lighting and things like that you know don't have access to in the technology that we had at the time. And then we have another machine. This is a multiplayer kind of world, a mini Oasis to a degree. And you have another machine which is just running a high fidelity camera viewport, which where you're able to get a little higher fidelity shaders and high fidelity lighting. And then you have another machine when you start getting into lighting and post processing and even rendering out of the game engine, where you're able to throw on like anti-aliasing, dithering, global illumination, and particles, like all the bells and whistles that you really get from using a real-time engine. You kind of enable it there, and so you're able to kind of graduate the visual look of the film through every single stage all the way to post-production, something that starts very simple and gray boxed all the way to something that is very high fidelity that you're seeing in the great work that ILM did.
Excellent. Well, we are out of time, so please join me in thanking the panelists.
Thank you, Dave.
My pleasure. All right, thanks everyone.